Okay, I'm inviting you to, whenever you have questions, to text them in to us right away, and then I'll interrupt Jeremy, who is used to me interrupting him because we're friends and we jab each other all of the time. The first thing I'm going to do is play a little video that I made relative to aviation taxes. I hope you enjoy this. Hi, I'm Tom Alston, and I'm going to give you some reasons why you should always pay sales or use tax on the purchase of an aircraft or a vessel. Let's get started. Number one reason, you're a politician and you'd get recalled if you were discovered to not be paying your fair share. Two, you're a private citizen and you believe politicians can do a better job spending the money than you can. Three, the tax is nothing but petty cash to you and you don't want to do the extra paperwork required to legally avoid the tax. Four, your corporation is doing well and you don't want to be attacked by politicians for being a corporate jet owner. Five, you're timid and can't face a tax auditor. That's my job. Let me do it. Six, your wife or girlfriend will nag you for taking a risk. I have a couple of questions for you. Where was she when you took the risk that created the company that created the wealth so you could buy the vessel or the aircraft? If she was complaining about risk then, you've already proved to her that risk is worth it. Seven, you got such a good deal on your aircraft or vessel, you feel like you should share something with the government. I never feel that way. Why do you? 8. Although the Supreme Court of the United States of America has affirmed your right to legally avoid tax, you still think it's illegal. 9. The last time you got audited, you met a great-looking woman that worked for the tax agency, and you want to see her again. Sure, all these are kind of in jest, but if you don't like any of them, you don't want to use any of these reasons, and you want to legally avoid the tax on an aircraft or a vessel purchase, call me first before you buy it. I'm Tom Alston, 916-691-9192, extension 108. The call's free. Thanks for listening. I want to introduce to everyone on this webinar Jeremy Cox, Vice President of Jet Brokers, and he's going to talk to you about aviation assets value. It's all yours, Jeremy.
Thank you, Tom. I appreciate it. Hopefully everyone can hear me just fine. I'm Jeremy Cox. I'm an expatriate Brit living in St. Louis now. I moved over when I was 24 years old, an old bugger. And all I've known is airplanes. So hopefully this will be of interest to you. To give you some background, I grew up on a pig, poultry, and dairy farm in England. I learned to fly at age 9. I moved to the USA in 1991. I've been around aircraft for 43 years. I'm a National Aircraft Appraisers Association, NAAA, Senior Certified Aircraft Appraiser. This takes 10 years of experience and 2 years of training to become certified. I am also an NAAA qualified buyer's agent too. I hold valid A&P mechanic ratings with inspection authorization. I also hold my FCC license with radar endorsement. I have 1,200 plus hours on a commercial multi-instrument ticket. I don't have a medical certificate because unfortunately I have type 2 diabetes, which is the prevail of most middle-aged people in this country, unfortunately. I've flown the Cessna Conquest and the Citation 650. I've done 2 North Atlantic deliveries in little airplanes, and I have towed targets for the NATO fleets out to sea from an airplane, actually from a Conquest and from a Beech Baron, and was shot at frequently, but fortunately wasn't shot out of the sky. My maintenance experience is broad, from light aircraft through the Lockheed, Boeing, and Airbus large cabin aircraft types, and I have actually bought and sold 68 different makes and models of jets and turboprops, plus a helicopter. So that's the introduction for me. Clicking onto the next slide. The title of this webinar is Aviation Assets Value, Ascertainment, and Management. Sounds very, very dry. But simply put, aviation assets value. The information is pertinent to aircraft owners, chief financial officers, aviation department managers, aviation companies. So let's talk about values. You can see in the first slide, we're talking about residual value. That is a key value in our business, especially in the airplane sales business. It is basically it's a comparison between what the aircraft was new reconciled against what its value today. I've given you an example, the residual value of the Citation Latitude, which is a relatively new airplane, less than 3 years old. It's at 83% of its new value. When it was 16.25 million in 2015, it's now running about 13.5 for 2015. Residual value is a very important gauge that can be used for a variety of purposes. Most importantly, it helps with knowing what your tax recapture might be when you sell your aircraft. Current market value divided by the original price paid times 100 equals residual value. Remember this though, residual value is not the same as depreciated value. The subject of depreciation is the purview of accountants, not me. Next slide. Well, value varies in many ways, or to determine the value of an aircraft.
Jeremy, let me interrupt you
Yes.
for a second. If you intended for it to go to page 3, that my slide on my computer hasn't changed to page 3.
How's that?
There we go. That's perfect.
I've got multiple screens here. I'm a bit of a techno, and I've got 3 screens in front of me, so I apologize. All right.
I'll try to remind you every time I think you've fallen off track.
Thank you very much, which is a daily occurrence for me.
Okay.
Value has multiple variables, as you can see with this slide. The problem with surfing the internet to look at aircraft values at sites like the Controller, Avbuyer, Global Air, and at many other sites is that even though 2 aircraft might look nearly identical by simple comparison on screen, they can be vastly different from each other value-wise. A detailed analysis and line item comparison must be performed to understand actual real value. None of the value guides, I'm talking about BREF, Blue Book, they can't do this accurately. It takes a knowledgeable and experienced person to accurately determine the value of an aircraft. If you came to me today, we did move slides, good. If you came to me today and told me that you are parking your aircraft and just want to be rid of it by parting it out, then this slide is an approximation of where the cash will come from. It's interesting because even today, the majority of the value comes from the engines, as you can see in the slide. And this is an approximation. Obviously, older aircraft, the engines the resale market for engines is less buoyant as they are on newer airplanes. Therefore, there may be less value, but proportionally, you're going to see about 70% of the value of the airplane coming from the engines. And landing gears next. You'll be surprised at a lot of the other things possibly from this slide. And I can tell you, over the years, this is an accurate portrait that gets parted out. So no matter how beautiful and how much money was spent on it, there is little to no resale market for aircraft interiors. I can tell you that most salvage companies throw the interiors into dumpsters once the aircraft hull is scrapped. I've sold several airplanes over the years to parts companies. And in fact, one a Lear 35 several years ago, we rode down from Salt Lake City to Oklahoma City. And the guy that bought the airplane rode on the airplane. He was going to take the airlines. And I said, come on, get in the airplane. Let's fly home in it. And he said, this is the first time I've bought an airplane for parked out that I've ridden home on. But we've seen a lot of airplanes that are fully functional and have really no issues. They've just reached a point where their residual value has fallen so low that the only place for it is to be parted out. But he showed me dumpsters behind their hangar on the south side of the Will Rogers World Airport in Oklahoma City, filled with interior components. There's just no value in an interior. It's interesting. If you look at this slide, this is a legacy airplane. Well, I say legacy, an old airplane. It's a Gulfstream pictured, obviously. But it's an older airplane that may make more sense to part out than it would to resell. And I've apportioned all the different values, but this same slide looks a whole lot different when the aircraft rolls off the factory floor prior to sale and delivery. It's simplified, and the new sales price can be dissected pretty much like this. So I don't have a slide for it, but I can tell you that 60% of the airplane's value is labor cost, 20% is materials cost, and 20% is profit. So that just gives you an insight into the difference between this slide and what a new airplane would look like. All right, next slide. We moved, good. Value, a definition of value, as you can read on the screen. Basically, it's interesting talking about value, and occasionally I get somebody that asks me that doesn't, they're not really that familiar, ask the question, why are aircraft almost always valued, traded, and sold in US dollars instead of euros, pounds, yen, francs, dinars, or renminbi, the Chinese currency? The US dollar is the world's most dominant reserve currency, meaning that it is a currency that is held in reserve for foreign exchange by most foreign governments, banks, and institutions. Many countries actually link their home currency to the US dollar at a fixed exchange rate, which is often 1-to-1. And another interesting point about the US dollar, all foreign holdings of US dollars, what I mean by that is any US dollars owned by non-US citizens are actually called Euro dollars, but they have nothing to do with the euro itself. But I think that's very interesting. But value is a monetary relationship between properties for those that buy and sell them. All right, next slide.
Let me interrupt you for a second.
Yes.
I want to remind everybody that's on this webinar that you have an opportunity to reach out to Jeremy while he's here and ask him questions. So if he says anything or uses any terms or that's not clear, stop, ask us. We'll get it handled right away. We want all of you to go away from this webinar significantly increased knowledge in these areas. You got it again, Jeremy.
Thank you very much, Tom. Yeah, I hope everyone that's watching this or will watch it in the future on the internet will actually derive some value from it. But talking about market value on this slide, obviously there are specific conditions that have to be considered for an appraiser to determine market value. What's interesting to me is to actually determine a value, you really need to have comparative data. And the bottom line with selling anything or anything that is being valued or anything that is up for sale is it's only ultimately worth what someone else is willing to pay for it. However, for there to be a market, an actual market, transactions must occur. And if there is a market, then there's comparative data available, which can be used at least as a guide to establish an asking price. it's very subjective. There's many reasons to have an appraisal, but generally speaking, you want to know either for insurance value, or you want to know if you want to sell the airplane, or you're buying the airplane and you're subjecting it to financing. Okay, next slide. Variety of values. I always find this an interesting statement because it is a statement of fact. Market values are consumer driven, while appraised values are driven by experts. I'm an expert, supposedly. What surprises me from time to time is an aircraft may be worth more than the appraised value. It's a very rare occurrence, but I'll give you an example of that. Let's say the appraised value is actually below the actual value in the case of a scheduled airline or medevac operator that would lose either their hospital contract as a medevac, or their carriage contract as an airline. If they were to lose the aircraft because it was repossessed and it's being appraised by the bank for refinancing, in that case, the airplane is actually going to be worth a lot more to them than the actual appraised value of the airplane. It's just interesting to me how that sometimes happens. Now we're moving on to topical stuff. The Dow Jones Industrial Average and aircraft values, historically, right up until spring of 2009, it would be fairly easy prior to 2009 to predict the value of an aircraft or future value of an aircraft just by reading the predictions for the Dow Jones Industrial Average. In fact, I joked back then that an aircraft broker equipped with a subscription to the Wall Street Journal was just as effective at valuing business jets as another broker who used the Blue Book or the VREF. However, in spring of 2009, this predictive methodology was smashed to smithereens. The global financial crisis, as you can imagine. So, what also happened prior to the global financial crisis, our industry, the business aviation industry, the original equipment manufacturers, especially the folks in Wichita, were going gangbusters. And as you can see, production really peaked in that 2006 through 2009 period. It ramped up and ramped down. Basically, you saw a 213% increase in production at its peak in 2008. That's more than double. The production line has momentum and requires time to rein in. By 2010, 40% discount off list price or more was not uncommon for new aircraft. Unfortunately, this desperation on the part of the OEM still goes on today. I was offered a new airplane back in May that delivered in May, and I was offered straight out of the box 40% off the new price. I won't tell you which manufacturer or what type of airplane it was, but it's still going on today. One of the problems with going gangbusters has been corrosion. And for those of you that are watching this that are familiar with aircraft pre-purchase inspections or actually maintaining airplanes, you may see that an airplane built between 2003 and 2010-ish, we're seeing significant levels of corrosion on them when we take them to a pre-buy inspection. It's my opinion that the majority of this corrosion is caused by improper heat treating, quenching, and anti-corrosion protection applied during the gangbusters 7-year production period. There's also a good chance that inferior aluminum was sold during the same period just to keep up with the demand. This is an unfortunate side effect of the boom in production back then, but it's not uncommon by any means. So, the dark days of the global financial crisis. Really doesn't need much explanation. I kind of grabbed everything that I could about how the global financial crisis came about, and an interesting comment that was made by a banker in October 2008 in response to the first version of the $700 billion Troubled Asset Relief Program. You remember that, called TARP, rolled out by the government, where they proposed buying the toxic assets from the banks. This banker made this comment, and basically TARP in its present form is akin to sending a battleship into a hurricane to calm the raging storm. In short, a useless action. Certainly don't want to go back to the days of the global financial crisis, but it was an eye-opener. Here, the next slide really means a lot to me, and I think probably means a lot to the people viewing this. The global financial crisis, it basically heralded the start. We had Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. We started hearing on the radio how they were going bankrupt, and that was at that point when we learned that they were privately owned. They weren't owned by the government. It was like, really? I didn't know that. Anyway, November 18th, 2008. People talk about September 11th. That was a massive day for the world, but for our industry, November 18th, 2008 was a massive day for us. As far as I'm concerned, this date is permanently burnt into my psyche. This is the date that the worst possible public relations mishandling in all of the history of business aviation. Instead of looking sheepish and not responding forcefully back to the question asked by Congress, how did you travel here to meet us today? By private jet. Yes, the four automotive executives failed to resolutely explain how traveling by any other means is both inefficient and bad policy for the country, the company, and all of the company's investors. Instead, they just lowered their heads and looked like bad schoolboys that have been caught smoking behind the bike sheds. Unfortunately, this was during the first term of President Barack Obama. You remember him. He's the guy that was actually received the Nobel Peace Prize just for being elected. This historic screw-up by the automotive executives played right into his popular rhetoric of promoting socialism pitted directly against capitalism, and from this moment on, he loved to use the term fat cats. Well, 100% of my income is derived from the people and institutions that our then Commander-in-Chief was referring to as fat cats. How many legal homegrown industries are decried and put down by the President of the United States? Well, business aviation was squarely under attack from the President. It quickly became passé for my clients to be using business aircraft. My livelihood was under presidential attack while the person behind these wild accusations was the biggest user of business aviation in the world. What a hypocrite. And by the way, the fluid that runs through the veins of our economy here in the United States is not Budweiser, it's jet fuel. Oh, and another thing, the airplane was invented here in the US as well. Now you see that the business aviation is 100% a homegrown industry, something to be very proud of and never ever decried by a president or anybody else. I'm proud of our business. Okay, so next slide talks about my personal Jeremy Cox Jet and Turboprop Index. I take all the airplanes listed on that slide, and I was looking at it weekly. What manifested this index was a client of mine, actually my best client. They asked me to tell them back then in 2008, 2009, when I thought the market had hit bottom. That's the reason why I created this index. I ended up buying them a Falcon 50X several years ago, but unfortunately, values are still dropping. So technically, we haven't really hit bottom.
Jeremy, I have a question for you from the audience.
Yeah, absolutely.
Is your report available to the public? Can they go on your website and view it for free? Do they pay you a subscription for it? How
Nope.
do they have access to that information from you?
If you actually surf over to JetBroker, JETBROKER .blog, that's a period, BLOG. That's my personal blog. I also have a blog on the JetBroker's website as well. And occasionally, I usually try and do it quarterly now. I will publish an update, but you'll find multiple previous posts on jetbroker.blog of the Cox Jet and Turboprop Index. All right.
Can I can I create links to that on our Aero Marine Tax Professionals
Please
website
do.
too?
Please do.
All right.
Absolutely. All
Okay.
right. Continuing on with values, today's residual values. Um, Unfortunately, the residual values of today look very similar to a tax depreciation schedule, which actually may go away with the new tax bill. I'm not sure if that piece of legislation was in there or not, but there was talk about it. But
Yes, my answer to that is
it's gone away.
yes. Well, you're going to be able to expense it 100% in the first year that you buy it.
I see. So there's no depreciation schedule. It's just 100%. It's just a spike. I
It
see.
looks like it's going to be that way.
Okay. Well, that's not necessarily a bad thing. Um, so basically, for the first 5 years or so on a new airplane, you would see average residual value of an airplane, a new airplane, uh, actually run above 100%. A lot of airplanes prior to 2007, 2008, new airplanes, large Falcons, large Gulfstreams. Heck, you'd see asking prices and selling prices were being paid for these airplanes 2, 3, 4, 5 years after they were delivered new, above what the owner actually paid for the airplane new. So you were above 100% residual value prior to global financial crisis, generally speaking, on the airplanes, and then it kind of worked its way down to a constant of about 60%.
I have another question for you. It says they want to know if they can get a copy of the PowerPoint after the presentation. I will answer part of this question. A video is being recorded of this entire webinar, which will be posted on my website. And everyone who's attended this thing will be sent a link to it, and they'll be able to look at it every day, 24 hours a day. So,
Well, I give you permission to send a copy, or you can send me an email directly or contact me, jcox@jetbrokers.com, jcox@jetbrokers.com. I'll be happy to send you the PowerPoint itself.
thank you, sir.
Anyway, residual values, the old normal prior to global financial crisis was about 60%. The new normal is down around 10%. It's terrifying. It really is. Next slide. And with that in mind about how residual values went from 60% down to an average about 10% these days, we're seeing natural obsolescence. Now, natural obsolescence would occur anyway, regardless of a global financial crisis. But this was a fun slide to put together, going from the 20s all the way out into the future. And you can see natural obsolescence occurring through the years, but the obsolescence in the most recent 10 years literally have been forced, in my mind. One thing that's going to come from this, aircraft recycling is definitely a growing segment of the industry. The availability of more and more engines on the salvage and parts market is the main reason for people with older aircraft to actually elect to leave the safety of service contracts like Honeywell MSP, Pratt's ESP, Rolls-Royce Corporate Care, and others. So you're seeing a lot of engines come on the market. And if you remember previous slide way back, about 70% of the value potting an airplane out comes from its engines. Okay, future predictions. I saw a thing come through the email 2 weeks ago that stage 4 noise legislation has actually been implemented by the ICAO, the International Civil Aviation Organization. I think you're going to see a total fleet reduction due to obsolescence. I think you're going to end up seeing 90% of all business jets younger than 2010, which is just amazing to me. I think you're going to actually see electric fans instead of jets eventually. You're going to see passenger drones, and we're also going to see low orbit flight to actually get from point A to point B quickly and efficiently. What's interesting about the 10 or X, the Neo, new engine options, and Max versions of the Airbus and Boeing airplanes, they're easily switched over to a drone function. I mean, they've got the technology, the onboard technology. Everything is there for them to be flown as drones instead of having crew on board. And I really expect to see that implemented well within my lifetime. So we're going to end up with drone airplanes. We're going to get on an airplane, go to Paris, go to London, and there won't be a pilot on board. It'd be the old adage of the pilot with the dog and on the food. You guys know that one. All right. Sticking with value, we're going to look at types of appraisals. As I said before, there's multiple reasons why an aircraft owner would want to have an appraisal, but there's basically two types of appraisal that are usually offered. And really, if it's a desktop appraisal, it's not reliable. An appraisal which is based upon zero inspection of the aircraft and its records is not a reliable methodology of returning a value. There are too many variables, which I showed you before, that are just not verified in a desktop appraisal. I'll give you some real life examples.
I'm sorry, a question that came by that I missed earlier. Yeah. Someone asked for a definition of natural obsolescence.
As applied to business airplanes, right?
Well, that's what we're talking about, so I imagine that's true.
To me, natural obsolescence, a lot of it comes by mandate. I mean, part of it has come from the cost of fuel, but oil is really low value at the moment. So it's not much of a factor, but back in the 1990s, you were seeing that probably 65% of the operating cost of an airplane was its fuel. Now it's probably down around 35% of the operating cost. But anyway, fuel consumption, noise, ability to fly into various airspace regions. I mean, you got the North Atlantic Tract region, between the U.S. and Europe. If you want to fly in the NATS, they call it the NATS, it goes beyond just having reduced vertical separation minima, RVSM. You've got to have CPDLC, computer pilot data link communications. You've got to have BRNAV. There are a lot of technicalities that have to be added to for an airplane to continue flying in certain parts of the world, which we're seeing with ADS-B coming up 2020. We've seen a lot of airplanes at the beginning with ADS-B, CPDLC, or should I say FANS 1A, Future Air Navigation System 1A. A lot of the airplanes actually went to the boneyard, especially the older Challengers, because they were just beyond economic sense to spend $1.5 million getting them FANS compliant when the airplane was worth about $1 million or less than $1 million. So some of the airplanes have natural obsolescence by definition of regulations.
Thank you, sir.
Does that answer the question?
It'll take us a little while to get an answer.
So
continue, and if they ask me back again, we'll dive back into it.
I'll give you some real world examples when I've gone to look at an airplane, whether I'm bringing it to market and looking at the airplane to write up a specification or I'm doing an appraisal. But there are massive swings between reported information and actual situation. Often I see wrong or multiple equipment reported. Frequently incorrect inspection status. And the only place you can find that is in the logbook. You can get a camp report, computerized aircraft maintenance program, or CAMS, or oh goodness, any of the maintenance tracking programs that are available, and SASCOM, what have you. But it's garbage in, garbage out. It's only as good as the data that's input into it. The logbooks is the primary source for that information. I often see incorrect inspection status reported by somebody, and then actually going to the logbooks and finding out, oh, yeah. Another thing that often happens is damage history. People say
I have an additional question for you.
Yes. Yes.
It says this might not directly be related to appraisals, but they want your opinion. You want to know if you think that ADS, it looks like it says 8, out of date, would be extended.
Oh, no, they're asking about ADSB, automatic data, automatic broadcast communications, ADSB, mandated 2020, January 1, 2020. It's interesting. We've seen this happen over and over in our business. There's the panic. We get into the panic zone. We saw it with RVSM. We've seen it with cockpit voice recorders way the heck back when. That was back in, what was that, 1990, 1991. Everyone was panicking for that. Then we had it with tours. We had all these things, and we had a specific date. It's mandated. This equipment has to be done. And everyone at that point running up to it says, there's no capacity. There's more airplanes than there are capacity to install this required equipment. Well, I'm probably going to get hit by a lot of MROs for saying this, but the reality is, just by waiting, we've seen more and more options available come onto the market, and the prices are going down. So I don't think you have to panic.
There's a follow-on question for this, Jeremy. We've lost you, Jeremy. All right, we're going to try to hook up back up with him. I've got a lot of really good questions are starting to roll in now. What is the cost in round numbers for an appraisal and travels? So hopefully we'll get him back on here in a second. I'm going to start one of my videos so you're not sitting here looking at.
I'm back on.
You're back on. All right. So there's a couple of follow-on questions. When appraising aircraft, how do you figure the ADSB out compliance into the overall value of the aircraft? And then there's going to be another question that's a follow-on to that.
Basically, if you're appraising an airplane that doesn't have ADSB, then it's something that has to be mentioned, and it has to be applied against the value of the airplane for the cost to comply with the ADSB. Absolutely.
So here's an opportunity for you to promote yourself. It says, what is the cost in round numbers for an appraisal plus travels on a Global, Gulfstream, Falcon 7X, Falcon 900s, etc.?
Typically, for that size airplane, I will charge $5,000 plus expenses. And it usually takes 5 working days after I get home, after spending a day or two on site going through all the logbooks and also inspecting the airplane. I don't remove any inspection covers. I don't remove or even require power on the airplane. But I do need to, it's nice to have lights on inside the airplane. But I take a lot of pictures inside and out, and I actually rate the condition of the interior and exterior against the scale, and obviously a lot of the assessment comes from the logbooks. But I usually charge $5,000 plus expenses. for
Does that cover a Citation 7 also?
Citation 7, I think would probably be more like 3,500.
Thank you.
All right, so I don't know at what point we cut off, but on-site appraisals, they're the best way to go. I've seen all sorts of things wrong. A sales specification says an airplane has 3 tube EFIS, and then you find out on site there's 2 tube EFIS. An airplane gets reported to have thrust reversers, then you find out it doesn't have any. Recently, a G5 was reported to me to have a crew rest compartment. And I got there and no crew rest compartment. Crew rest compartments are fairly popular. Another one that blew me away was Global Express. I did an on-site over in London at Farnborough, and I was told it had a heads-up guidance system. And I get up in the cockpit and I see this box, the box for the projector, but it's empty. It was an empty box above the pilot's head because it wasn't installed. They had provisions. That was it. Makes a big difference in value. I mean, you're looking at probably $140,000 in value difference on a global without with and without heads-up guidance system. Move on or take more questions.
Go ahead. I'll interrupt you when the questions come in.
All right, all right. Since my website crashed and I'm back, I've got to find the next slide.
Do you want me to try to move the slide for you?
Nope, I can get it. I'm almost there. I think
Page 18 is what we're looking for. Is next.
I think it's this one.
Okay.
Yes, this is it. Here we are. Okay. Upgrades and service programs. So here's some sage advice for aircraft owners, directors of aviation, accountants, and so forth. These are tried and true rules of thumb. You'll get 50 to 80% of the cost of avionics upgrades back. You'll never get 100%. You rarely get anything back from interior refurbishment. Stripping and repainting an airplane, don't think of it as an upgrade. Paint it for resale. It's maintenance. Think of stripping and repainting as maintenance. Obviously, when you have an airplane, and if you choose to strip and repaint it and put an absolutely ugly scheme on it, then obviously you're probably going to have to either discount the selling price of the airplane or have it painted prior to putting it on the market, because it's just not a saleable paint scheme. But think of paint as maintenance, not an upgrade. You'll get 75% on engine overhauls. Don't be cheap on LLP replacements, life limited parts. The real cost of it on an engine overhaul comes from the compressor and turbine discs and shafts, and they're very expensive, and there are options made available, especially if you're a JSSI customer. JSSI tries to manage your maintenance events, and they will try and have a cheaper version of a life limited part put in your engine. If you're on like MSP, Honeywell MSP's program, you'll always get a new part. You won't get a used part, generally speaking. Sometimes you get used parts with the Pratt programs. Don't be cheap on the parts replacements. And on average, you will pay up to 50% more for a program than self-insuring. In fact, I think that's probably inaccurate. I think you pay more than that. Remember, if you're upgrading an airplane or doing anything on an airplane with the view of reselling it, think about market position. Don't think about getting that money back. Think about position. The thing that kills me with some of the clients that I've dealt with over the years, especially the owner pilot flown type airplanes, Citation, King Airs, and so forth. It's often I hear them say, I put over $3 million into my jet in the last 5 years since I've owned it. Therefore, it's worth $3 million more than any of the others on the market. It's downright crazy. But unfortunately, the uneducated still believe that this is reality. you've got to take care of these airplanes. If when a buyer looks at your airplane, they're going to realize that it's not in good condition and it has issues, and it's going to either the buyer's either going to discount what he's willing to pay for the airplane considerably, or he's just going to walk away from the airplane and say, I'm not a buyer for this airplane. Another thing I see quite often, nothing against pilots, I was one, however, don't get conned into, don't get conned by your pilots into spending hundreds of thousands of dollars on avionics upgrades. You know, there may be no real benefit to you. You know, the whole point with avionics is safety, efficiency, and the ability to continue flying ever-changing regulatory airspace. These are the only reasons to do these upgrades. Maybe resale value too. I mean, I often hear, and it's now a mantra in our business, how can you call it a business aircraft if it doesn't have Wi-Fi? And I think they're right. You need to be connected when you're in the sky. So, you know, Wi-Fi, if you're getting ready to sell an airplane and you don't have Wi-Fi on board the airplane, you ought to put it in, because it'll help it sell quicker and for a higher price, I would hope.
Jeremy, I have two new questions for you. We'll start with, they want you to explain how self-insurance works on an aircraft engine with respect to catastrophic failure due to internal issues, not FOD.
Well, obviously, and that, you're absolutely right. You're exposed. It's you're at the craps table, and you've just thrown craps. Flood is covered by insurance. Catastrophic failure is not covered. It's covered by your pocketbook. So yeah, if you're on a program, you're covered. If you're not on a program, it comes out of your rear end. So right.
You start to get the correct definition of self-insured when that happens, right?
Exactly.
The follow-on question to that question is, how does this affect the value of an aircraft if the engines are self-insured versus the programs such as MSP or ESP?
Well, it's simple. Buyers like programs, but it's not uncommon. In fact, it's very, very common now for a buyer to buy an airplane because it has all the programs. They'll run the airplane until an overhaul comes up on the engines that are on the programs, and then once they go through the overhauls, then they remove it off the program and self-insure. Buyers like programs, but we're seeing a lot of people leave the programs. They just don't see the benefit or value, other than shooting craps. You're absolutely right. There is a possibility of shooting craps. Going back to stripping and painting, you know, a really good paint job will last more than 10 years without needing to be repainted, stripped and repainted. A cheap one, I think you'll have difficulty seeing 2 years out of a bad strip and repaint, my opinion. All right, moving on. How are we doing for time? We doing all right for time?
Yeah, we're at 48 minutes, so we got, you know, if we want to try to finish it at an hour, we got 12 minutes.
All right. Well, I've got 3 more slides, and that's it. So we're good to go. Okay. Here we go. The pros of programs. It's kind of in response to the question. You can read it for yourself. It's kind of silly me reading it to you, but you can see the number one example is buyers like programs. There you go.
Jeremy, it might help to, especially on screens like this, that whenever there's an acronym like an LLP or an FOD, to explain them rather than presuming that 100% of the people in the audience understand what all those things mean.
Okay, LLPs, as mentioned before, life limited parts, discs and shafts inside the engine. FOD, foreign object damage. Basically, in flight, you go through a hailstorm, and those lumps of ice take out your fan and some of the compressor blades behind the fan. That's FOD. Or something gets picked up. Well, look, Concorde in Paris. That was FOD that took down Concorde. It was a piece off a TR from a Continental Airlines DC-10, and it got picked up by the Concorde's tire, punctured the fuel tank, and the airplane went down. That was FOD. R&R, removal and replacement, R&R. And TBO, time between overhaul. We get the cons of programs are this. I said you're going to pay half as much. I think often you're going to see 1.5 times out of pocket compared to your program cost as opposed to self-insuring. But of course, you could be throwing craps as well if you did have a catastrophic failure. But heck, if you have a catastrophic failure, you're not worried about that. You're worried about getting on the ground. You're not worried about money. Freedom of choice. Let's see. The buy-in cost, if you're off program, unless you're under 1,500 hours time since new, it's going to be prohibitive. You're just never going to realize the value of buying into it. Like I said before, sometimes you're not even allowed to make your own decisions on a program. The thing I hear a lot, especially after the global financial crisis, when people started parking their airplanes because it was passé to fly, they had made a commitment on the programs to fly usually 250 hours a year and send money to Phoenix, MSP, money sent to Phoenix, or any of the other programs. I don't mean to sidle out Honeywell as a whipping horse, but you have to send that money to the provider, regardless of whether you fly or not. And people that ended the program ended up having to pay basically a get out because they hadn't met the minimums. So just read the small print. I will single out Honeywell now. Thing that really bothers me with Honeywell is the fact that you have their programs that cover their equipment, and often they will just turn around and say, this gyro, we are no longer going to manufacture it. We are no longer going to support it. You're out of luck. Oh, by the way, you've got to put a laser gyro in its place, and it's going to cost you $700,000 to do it. It's not covered by the program anymore. It's annoying how the manufacturers actually inbuild obsolescence into their airplanes on parts. But anyway, I'll stop bitching. Next one, and believe it or not, this is the last slide. Some more sage advice. A lot of your values tied up in the records. Store them appropriately. Put them in a water, fire proof safe. Never ship your records. God, I received a box on a King Air years ago, and there was a hole in the box, and the box was half empty, and half the record was gone because the airplane had gone to pre-buy. I think we were buying the airplane, and the airplane was at pre-buy, and the records weren't included. They weren't put on the airplane and shipped them, and the box showed up with a hole in it. Keep your invoices. Keep everything to do with that airplane and consider it part of the aircraft record. That will add provenance. That will add pedigree to the value of that airplane when you've got everything to do with that airplane. Anyone can look anything up and say, that's a good airplane.
Would you mind, Jeremy, would you mind if I interrupted you for a second to announce to the world that if they want an overwatch done by someone else to make sure that they have all their records and stored properly, we are offering in the future a brand new service where they can get connected to us, and we will become the overwatch of all that, follow up, make sure that we have all the records, and they'll be stored digitally so that they'll have access to them permanently.
Sounds like a good service. Absolutely. Hang on whenever possible. I'm actually in the process of looking for a Falcon 7X to buy for a client of mine, and we're not even considering airplanes that are from the Middle East that have not been in a hangar. If they're not hangared, then forget it. It's just going to be fraught with corrosion and problems. I actually picked up I went out to Saudi Arabia last year and looked at a Falcon 900B, which we ended up selling, and it actually had a hole corroded through the top skin because the airplane sits outside, and it was in Jeddah, and it sits on the coastline there, and it's highly corrosive, the salt air in Jeddah. It's just a horrible place, and in fact, the ramp where the airplane was parked, there must have been 50 different airplanes from 747s on down to beach jets, and Hawkers sitting outside and just rusting away. So yeah, hangar it whenever possible, keep it clean. Damage history is an issue, and the most important thing of all, hire a professional aircraft broker. Okay, I'm done. That's 5 minutes or 4 minutes before finish time. How about that? Questions? Hello? Is anyone there? Well, thank you all very much indeed. My webinar is over. I don't know what happened to Tom, but thank you for enduring this performance. You can reach me at jcox@jetbrokers.com. We're based at the Spirit of St. Louis Airport, Chesterfield, Missouri. We're in our 25th year. We have offices in Chicago, Detroit. Where do we have offices? Geneva, London. So that's it. Thank you very much. Tom, where'd you go?
Are you there?
I'm done.
Okay. That's, for as far as I know, we've reached the end of this presentation by Jeremy, and we are signing off. Everyone will get a video copy of this presentation. Jeremy, if you can hear me, thank you very much.
Thank you. Happy Christmas to everybody.
I agree. Thank you.